Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining early. Let's wait for a couple of minutes that more attendees connect. So yes, let's start maybe at 5:32 Japanese time. Thank you for being on time, those of you who already connected. Okay, let's start. So hello, everyone. My name is Quentin Verspieren. I'm an assistant professor at the Science, Technology, and Innovation Governance program of the Graduate School of Public Policy at the University of Tokyo. And it is my pleasure to host this series of STIG space policy webinars. So today is the second seminar that we are organizing under this umbrella. And it will focus on the governance of active debris removal activities, looking at Japan having recently initiated some form of regulation for active debris removal and on-orbit servicing activities. And then we will also mention a recent private workshop that was organized by the University of Tokyo on this topic with a variety of international experts. First of all, I would like to introduce, for those of you who join us for the first time, what is the Science, Technology, and Innovation Governance Program. So it is a program of the University of Tokyo that focuses on education and research about technology governance. And as its mission is inherently interdisciplinary, it is a joint program of various graduate schools of the university, the Graduate School of Public Policy, Graduate School of Engineering, Law and Politics, Economics, Medicine, etc., etc. And this program is one of similar programs that have been established in various Japanese universities through funding of the Ministry of Education of Japan, trying to promote science policy and science for policy, this program being called SCIREX. And so the STIG program has equivalent programs at other universities such as Kyoto University, Osaka University, etc. And we have a network of universities and research centers on technology governance. The first main aspect of the program is education. We have currently around 200 students registered, 25% approximately of them from public policy, 25% from the Graduate School of Engineering, and the rest, there is a mix of other graduate schools, so frontier science, agriculture, arts and science, medicine, etc. And these students are following various courses related to science and technology policy, scientific subjects, and public policy subjects, all courses being interdisciplinary. And by selecting several courses in a specific curriculum that we suggest, they can receive, upon graduation, a certificate in science, technology, and innovation governance. Apart from the educational aspect, we have a strong research team that focuses on various aspects of technology governance, be it bioengineering, energy, or space. And here I'm presenting the team working on space policy at the STIG program. So we have full-time faculty from the Graduate School of Public Policy and STIG, led by the director of the STIG program, Professor Shiroyama, as well as Professor Suzuki, who is the keynote speaker for today, and myself. We also have visiting faculty and researchers from various organizations in Japan, including JAXA, and Mr. Kikuchi, who will be a speaker for the second part of this workshop, is a visiting faculty in our program. So faculty activities focus, of course, mostly on research and publication, and I illustrated here with a recent book that we published on ASEAN Space Program, and that was the subject of our first space policy webinar last month. And we are, like many of you, I can see, I can recognize many names in the audience, are quite present in media conferences. We are involved in various Japanese and international governmental projects, etc., etc. Overall, to give you the essence of what we do at STIG, I would say that in terms of space policy education and research, we became over the last few years the leading center for space policy education and research in Asia, and one of the leading ones in the world. On the educational front, we are open to students, whether they just finished their bachelor or master and they want to join us for master or PhD, or mid-career professional, as the Graduate School of Public Policy accommodates mid-career professionals. So for a degree in public policy, but you could have a focus on space policy by working with us and taking our courses. We are open to joint research projects with universities, research institutes, government agencies, and the industry. And as a matter of fact, after making this announcement during the first webinar, we were contacted by a think tank in India, and we'll start some collaboration. And we hope to contribute to disseminating information on space-related issues in the Asia-Pacific region, and today's event is one of these, one key element of this vision. Now, let's talk about today's webinar, the main reason why you are here. So today's webinar will focus on the governance of active debris removal, and more generally on-orbit servicing and rendezvous and proximity operations. So I will not read these definitions in detail. I'm sure you're all very much aware of what is OOS, ADR, and RPO. Basically, on-orbit servicing is about having a servicer vehicle, I would say, operating on a client vehicle, whether it is for inspection, orbital modification, maintenance, refueling, upgrade, repair, assembly. Active debris removal is the action of removing some piece of debris from orbit, from a useful orbit, by deorbiting it or placing it into a graveyard orbit, or destroying it entirely, possibly recycling it, which in that sense is really linked to on-orbit servicing. And rendezvous and proximity operation is, I would say, the umbrella term that encompasses OOS, ADR, and all other activities that involve having two assets approaching at close distance and docking or not. And I use some terms such as servicer, client, and one interesting part of the discussion on on-orbit servicing and RPOs in general is the importance of the terminology. The terminology has actually evolved in recent years, in particular the CONFERS, so a committee of industrial actors working on this issue has been instrumental in having us evolved in the way we talk about on-orbit servicing. So for those of you who have been working on the topic for a long time, you may heard about target, chaser, but now the industrial terms tend to be more on the client-servicer relationship. Another aspect of background that I think is important before addressing today's topic and starting with the keynote is about the terminology that we use when we talk about instruments to deal with space safety and sustainability. In other words, what do we talk about when we talk about an international regime? What is it composed of? And more specifically, we often hear about norms and rules. So what are they and what is the difference? Because we'll use this term a lot in following presentations. So here and for the sake of most of our projects, we like to use the most, I would say, consensual definition of international regime from Krasner, I think 1983, that defines the regime as composed of 4 elements: principles, norms, rules, and decision-making procedures. And the 2 most important for our discussion today: norms, that are standards of behavior defined in terms of right and obligation, and rules, that are specific prescriptions or proscriptions for action. Let me illustrate that with a case in, let's say, space safety and sustainability for ADR operations, for instance. The one principle would be that it is important to conduct ADR operations in a way that doesn't increase tensions or doesn't involve a misconception or miscalculation about one's intention. This is a general principle. Everyone agrees that it is better to avoid tensions when conducting ADR operation. A norm would be that each state or each operator should take necessary measures to increase transparency when they conduct ADR operation. And a rule would be a more specific prescription or proscription. For instance, that operators conducting ADR operations would have to provide precise SSA information on the status of both the servicer and the client before, during, and after the ADR operation to increase transparency on what has been done. And decision-making procedure could entail a lot of things that are not necessarily useful to mention here. So I really want to clarify this before we jump in the discussion. And one other important aspect is that whether norms or rules are legally binding or not doesn't, how can I say, talking about norm or rule doesn't imply anything on whether it's legally binding or not. You can have legally binding rules or non-legally binding rules. This is something different because we often hear in the community rules implied as something that is legally binding. They are often at domestic level. It's not true at international level. And the question on whether it's useful or not to have a legally binding rule is an important debate, but that I will not address now. Now, without further ado, I would like to start with today's first keynote that will be delivered by Professor Kazuto Suzuki, my esteemed colleague, on Japan's recent progress on the licensing of OOS and ADR activities. It will be followed by a public reporting session of a private workshop that we had on ADR technologies and associated governance priorities by my colleague, Mr. Kikuchi, and myself. A few words of caution and background about this private workshop before giving the floor to Professor Suzuki. So it was a private workshop with leading international experts from the industry, government, academia, and think tanks from North America, Europe, and East Asia. Of course, I will not give you the exact identities. Session 1 focused on the state of the art of ADR technology. Session 2 on international norms promotion on activity removal It was held under the Chatham House rule, meaning that we are free to share any information that was discussed and shared during the meeting, but we will not disclose the identity nor the affiliation of the speakers, as well as of any participant to the workshop. The only thing that we can tell you is North America, Europe, East Asia, from industry, government, academia, think tanks, around 12 people. So now I will stop sharing my screen and I will give the floor to Professor Suzuki. So we will have Professor Suzuki's presentation will be of around 20 minutes, and then we'll have around 10 minutes for Q&A. So I encourage you to submit your questions in the Q&A box, and Professor Suzuki will take them. Thank you very much, and Professor Suzuki, the floor is yours.
Right. Thank you, Quentin, and thank you very much for coming. As Quentin explained, that this is a this is a public reporting session of the privately held meetings, but it is more of just reporting, but I think it is a very creative and constructive forum to discuss about the norms and the behaviors in the space and how to make the rules. So, well, Quentin, since he's a real academic and he wants to have the very precise definition, but when we talk about norms, I think the easiest way of understanding is that to look around you and to see what is the norm or what we can define as a norm. For example, if you live in Tokyo or any countries in the major cities, when you take the escalator, in Tokyo, people stand on the left and free up a space on the right-hand side. And it works in right-hand side in New York or London or Paris or elsewhere. But Tokyo, when you come to Tokyo, then you have to stand on the left. That's the norm, because the rule, it's not legally binding to stand on the left. If you don't stand on the left, if you stand on the right, you will not be punished. If you stand on the right or in Tokyo, that's okay. I mean, it's legally allowed, but you stand on the left because you think that if you stand only yourself standing on the right and the rest of the entire population is standing on the left, you feel very awkward. You feel very strange. You feel very uncomfortable. And then immediately you start shifting yourself to the left. That's the norm, because the norm is the sets of behavior that is either it doesn't have to be written. And in fact, in Tokyo, the rule says you shall not walk on the escalator. So you don't have to open the right-hand side, but still people do so because people don't want to be seen as an awkward position. You just follow what others people do. And that's the norm. And I think this is the very much of the concept when you talk about norms. And internationally speaking, since we don't have a world government, we don't have the world policeman. Well, the United States used to play the world policeman, but since President Obama declared that United States is no longer the world policeman, and the President Trump has declared that everyone have it's America first, and everyone has to do their own businesses. There is no policeman in the world. So if there is no rules, or even if it's legally binding, there is no jail or no court or no government to punish you. There are a possibility that people break rules. For example, Russia is now attacking Ukraine. for various reasons, but you know, it's from my point of view, it's a clear violation of the international law, and which is the fundamental part of the international law. But nevertheless, you can't really punish Russia because, well, partially because it's a nuclear country, but also because, you know, there are no obligations of any countries to intervene and punish Russia. So at the end of the day, what is written, what is legally binding is not, these are, of course, makes a difference, but the norms are also very important. And these peer pressure, the pressures from, you know, other side, the people around you, and also the common interest and common understanding of what is the appropriate behavior in the society is extremely useful concept. Although it's not binding, but still it has certain powers to make the world goes around and to formulate certain patterns of behavior in the world. So on that note, I would like to give the sort of general description of what we are doing in our project to explain the Japanese approach to the transparency and confidence building measures on the active debris removal operations. The active debris removal, as the Kantan already mentioned, that to remove debris, because the debris is now being everyone's headache. There are more than 20,000 debris, known debris, and it is increasing. And there is a possibility and increasing chances that it is going to hit the other satellites. And now we are watching the behavior of debris so that we can, you know, the active satellites can move and to duck the collision. But sometimes it's not working. For example, in 2013, the Ecuador has launched the first satellite of the country, and which suddenly disappeared in 2 weeks after the launch. And the reason was they hit by debris. And, you know, those were the sort of the firstborn national satellite. And then you just lose it because of the population of debris. So what Japan is trying to do is to promote the active debris removal. But the other major problem of the active debris removal is that if you can take out the debris, then you can also take out the other satellites. So the servicers approaching to the target satellite and then grab it and then take it out. That can be possible, although it's not always happening. If the satellite have the capability of grabbing other satellite, or, you know, capturing the debris by net, or, you know, to harpoon, or, you know, many other varieties of methods to capture the debris or satellite. But what is important is the intention. Intention means, what is this spacecraft is doing? Is this trying to capture the other country's satellite, or trying to remove debris? So what this servicer will do needs to be known by everyone and verified. The verification, providing information that where this satellite is and how this, what is this satellite doing, and what is the intention of being there and approaching to other satellites or other space objects. And that is the transparency. providing information and transparent of its intent and its behavior, its information. And in order to do so, we need to have the confidence building measures. Confidence building measures mean these activities are verifiable and we can understand where they are, what they are doing, and how they are doing. So this will give you the confidence that, okay, what this information is correct, and we can verify. Somebody is watching, and other people, other countries have capability of recognizing the positions of satellite and the behaviors, movements, and these are basically the ways to make people confident that these information transparency measures are the correct one. So transparency and confidence building measures, or take the acronym TCBM, is the key issue for the active debris removal or any RPOs, the rendezvous and proximity operations. And our project is working on that and trying to make how to build up the norms of transparency and confidence building measures. It's not just Japan, but it's all other members of the space communities, other spacefaring nations will follow the suit. So that is basically the objective of this project, and this is one of the papers that we submitted to, we presented to one of the conferences, and I'll just go through this presentation. So, as Quentin mentioned, the setting up an international rules is extremely difficult, and it has been stagnating because on the one hand, China and Russia is trying to make the legally binding measures, which is not really attracting the support, because legally binding measures always end up with the very narrow focused rules, and which is not practical, and it takes a long time. But on the other hand, the European Union was trying to do the non-legally binding norm building measures. The problem was that the EU has used the different forum so that it didn't, it wasn't really giving the sense of community, sense of participation. So all the other members are either, take it or leave it situation. And that will not create the community like, people on the escalator. You need to have the common concept and common shared understanding and shared interest for following the rules. So both approaches of China and Russia and the EU failed, and now it's stagnating, and it's really hard to find the pathway to set up the international rules and norms. But as I said, there are increasing number of debris, and it is much more difficult for the spacecraft to be launched. And there are increasing number of active satellites because of the small satellite constellations. Perhaps you may have heard this Starlink that is developed and operated by the SpaceX, Elon Musk's company. And this Starlink is now having more than 2,500 satellites, the Starlink alone. And so there is a growing number of satellites deployed in the orbit. So we don't have the time to wait for the interstate rivalries to be resolved, and to set up the rules and negotiate all through around. So we need to have something to start with. We can't wait too much because of the debris issue. So what we are proposing now is that there is a theory of international norm setting and the norm distribution, and that is based on the work of Fimore and Sikink in 1998. And this study shows that there are 3 stages of norm building. The first is the norm emergence, which is driven by the norm entrepreneur, and norm entrepreneur who have a strong notion and vision, and to mobilize the members of the community. So the norm emerges when the norm entrepreneur are trying to develop the idea and to disseminate this idea. And then the norm cascade happens if there are a number of countries are accepting the new norms. And that is called the norm cascade. If the norm cascade start to happen, then we would expect that some tipping point. The tipping point is about 1/3 of the community, including the major spacefaring nations, including China and Russia. And if China and Russia says, okay, the idea is good and that will serve for the interest of everyone, then there will be an opportunity to internalization of norms. That people think that this is normal and this is usual and it's a common sense. It's something that's appropriate. So that is the ways in which the norm appeared and spread and the internalized. And if the norm is internalized, then it becomes stabilized. So that's what Fimore and Sikink are doing. And what Japan is doing is trying to be the norm entrepreneur. The norm entrepreneur is the one who has the strong notion and vision, and that vision is something called the new guidelines on the license to operate the spacecraft performing on-orbit servicing. This document is translated in English, so if you are interested in, I'll be happy to share. This document provides the idea that this is how you work in the space, and on-orbital servicing, rendezvous and proximity operation, active debris removal. If you do one of those things, you need to follow the guideline. The guideline says prevention of infringement of the rights related to the target object, which means the target object, there are rights, for example, the property rights that, these debris spacecraft, or, these are someone's spacecraft. So it has to be, it has to respect the right, but at the same time, when you remove them, you need to make sure that you are not going to infringe with the right. And the details of the information disclosure for ensured transparency. So this is the core of this guideline, and it is have the detailed description of notification, to inform the society that this is what we are going to do, and reporting of the operation, which means, we are operating here and there and what we are doing. So we keep reporting. And if there is a problem or emergency, then there will be procedures to notify other people and providing the information. So those are the guidelines, what guideline says. And implication of that is that these servicers should not approach to the space object of which the owner, operator, or a state of registry are unknown without notice, which means that everyone should be notified. Everyone should have the understanding of what Japan is doing or Japanese spacecraft is doing, and to make sure that everyone knows what they're doing. So the expectation of this guidelines is to set up the basic principles of safety and transparency, which are inevitable to realize the sustainable space activities, and thought that this is a global common values. So what Japan is needing to do is to convince that this is a global common values, and this is also a global common interest, and make sure that if you follow those rules, then you'll be happy and everyone will benefit from that. And what is also interesting is that this is the approaches to use the commercial services, commercial actors and activities. So the guidelines and rules are another details of the procedures are likely to have the worldwide impact, serving as both the foundation of the approach to on-orbiter servicing and also will play as a benchmark to evaluate upcoming foreign initiative. So this means that Japan, this is a Japanese national legislation or regulation, but it can be copied, it can be benchmarked, it can be, standardized as the model for other countries to follow. So if the other countries follow, then this is the norm cascade. If everyone thinks that this is the right way of doing this, and in fact, the European unions are now considering, we are now in discussion with other countries to explain what we are doing. And if everyone thinks that this is the right thing to do, then it will be disseminated. It will be accepted by other countries, and then gradually, hopefully, it will go beyond the tipping point. So there are benefits of the guidelines and rules. For example, the providing a clarity of the application of the regulatory requirements for the on-orbit servicing, and the absence of the regulation will hampering the operation of the new players, and the actual operation practices should serve as a basis for the establishment of norms and provide concrete mechanism for transparency. So everyone will have the idea of what transparency look like and how these confidence building measures can be established. So in conclusion, this is still the work in progress, and we are not yet having the end result, but it certainly has the potential to inspire other governments and to contribute to the development of norms and regulations around the world. And if Japan was to present these new guidelines to the United Nations Open-Ended Working Group, which is established based on the resolution adopted last year, and which was supposed to be held in February, but unfortunately, because of the situation in Ukraine, this meeting is postponed, and hopefully we are going to have the open-ended working group in May. But if this is the case, then Japan will present these new guidelines, and then it may have a chance to initiate the norm cascade phase. So I'll stop here, and I'm looking forward to have questions, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Suzuki. So, do we have any question from the audience? I don't see any in the Q&A box. So, considering that we have a few minutes, if some of you would rather raise their hand and ask a brief question, it is also possible. Considering also that after the public reporting of our ADR workshop, we will have around, I think, between 15 to 20 minutes at the end for, again, discussion and overall comments by Professor Suzuki. So you can also ask your questions at this time. Ingo Baumann asked, how do you consider open standards and interface as another potential principle?
That's a good question. However, the problem of open standard and interface is the problem that there is no leadership. And, you know, if everything is just put on the table and then it is revised and re-revised, then it would not have the it will not give you the sort of a sense of security that what you are doing is the right thing, because this may be changed in the near future. If someone is, you know, if it's open standard and if it's open-ended to any participants of the rulemaking process. So even though, for example, in case of the escalator, you don't need to have the leadership because it's either standing on the left or right, and it is more naturally generated the norm coming from a necessity. But I think in this case, setting up a norm requires the certain technical capabilities and certain leadership to shape the what are the rules, even though this is non-legally binding, but what are the rules, what rules should be, and what is the most efficient way of implementing those rules. So I think I'm not. I think in this case the open standard and interface is not really a good approach to that extent.
Thank you very much. Do we have other questions from the audience? I'll give you a few more seconds, and if not, as I said, we'll move to the reporting, and we can come back in the end, because as you will see, so in our reporting, we'll really be transparent about everything that was discussed, and I think it will be interesting for you because you may disagree with certain approach. There were some statements that were fairly bold. So I'm sure we can have more questions and discussion after the reporting. Okay, I don't see any more question. I don't see any hand being raised. So I will now invite